John Boorman's 1981 film Excalibur is a lavishly mounted spectacle, a retelling of the famous Arthurian legends of British folklore and literature. The story of King Arthur and of Lancelot, and the sword and the stone, the Knights of the Round Table, the quest for the Holy Grail, the establishing of Camelot, and how forbidden romance and untamed lust tore the entire thing apart. The film is most definitely unique, sometimes transcendently beautiful and perfect. But some of the time, the film feels like the hunt for the Holy Grail itself, an impossible mission undertaken by those loyal to the throne, in the same way that Boorman was loyal in bringing these legends to life. A long, grueling journey in which the item sought is never fully recovered. But was the quest in vain if one finds illumination at the end? I love Boorman's Excalibur, though, because it's one of the few, if not the only, major film in the pantheon of Arthurian cinema to take the actual legend head-on. Yeah, it's got its own style and vision, but it doesn't have an obvious gimmick. All the other movies have a gimmick. It's not a musical, it's not a parody, a cartoon for kids, a retelling with the veneer of historical accuracy, or like a horrible hip action thing. The story of Arthur, like the mythical Holy Grail itself, is elusive. Boorman, loyal to the legend, is something which as a young English boy no doubt seared itself into his psyche. Most Arthur films pre-Excalibur tend to focus on a specific portion of the legend, most notably the love triangle, the forbidden romance between Queen Guinevere and the noble Sir Lancelot, which features in the popular musical Camelot, Robert Bresson's Lancelot de Lac, the sort of undercooked Jerry Zucker First Knight, and the Warner Brothers spectacle, The Knights of the Round Table, in which the swaggering Robert Taylor and beautiful Ava Gardner steam up the screen while Mel Ferreira's Arthur lingers ceremonially, his obviously fake beard accentuating his impotence. But Boorman goes all in on Arthur, really. He takes on everything, all the greatest hits of the legend, and endeavors to cram it all into 140 minutes, taking Thomas Mallory's episodic, decade-spanning epic and succeeding, for the most part, to craft a coherent narrative from a nearly 700-year-old story, a story whose morals, mores, and cultural touchpoints aren't simply outdated per se, but sort of inexplicable to a modern audience. So the thing that always kind of bedeviled me as someone who is interested in King Arthur was where do you locate the nexus of the source material? Where did the core idea come from? What is the definitive text? Well, there's a few, and you'll find that they all sort of borrow and add to each other over time to create the mythology of the Arthurian kingdom and Camelot that we know today. It began with this guy named Geoffrey of Monmouth, who was sort of a man of letters in the early 1100s. He wrote a manuscript called The Histories of the Kings of England, in which he includes Arthur and Merlin and lots of other elements we'd be very familiar with today as part of the legend. But he sort of tries to pass it off as a true history. Now, there's evidence that the Arthurian tales had been circulating for maybe many hundreds of years before Monmouth wrote them down in his text, because we found marble engravings of Arthurian stories in action in places as far away as Italy that predate Monmouth's writing. So after Monmouth really popularized and legitimized the stories by putting them in print, we have this guy named Chrétien de Troyes, who was a French author who imbued the story with a lot of the chivalric elements and romantic drama that we understand today. So Lancelot de Lac was a creation of Chrétien de Troyes, or at least he was the first person to include this element in text. So Lancelot is often thought of as like a very definitively French inclusion in the story. Chrétien also fleshes out the love triangle between Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot, and he adds the hunt for the Holy Grail. Then we have what is perhaps the most accessible version of the story, which was the 1400s, and that would be Sir Thomas Mallory's version, La Mort d'Arthur, The Life and Death of Arthur. And he was somewhat of a roguish guy. He wrote it from jail, actually. He was accused of rape and theft, and he was like a minor nobleman type character living during the War of the Roses. So lots of his work is imbued with this idea of wanting to have a stable king and nation in a time in which Britain was going through a civil war of sorts. And for a while after that, the Arthurian myths sort of died down and went away, and they were rehabilitated and brought back to the public consciousness by Alfred Lord Tennyson in the 19th century with his poetic romance, The Idylls of the King. And then from there, once the Arthurian stories were back in favor, lots of children in the early 20th century became familiar with them through the works of Howard Pyle. And myself, I've always been a big fan of T.H. White's retelling, The Once and Future King.
A world of wisdom. wizards, kings, warriors, queens, swords, sorcery, and desire. Forged of splendor and magic, where future meets past, flesh meets steel, and the only fear is the pain of love. Excalibur, sword of power, sword of kings.
Boorman begins with an extended prologue. Too extended, if you ask me, as we spend 20 minutes with a young Gabriel Byrne playing Arthur's decidedly less noble father, Uther Pendragon, a man who's lusting for the wife of a fellow nobleman, Lord Cornwall, in danger a hard-won peace, a war to unite Britain, seemingly driven by his political aide and mysterious confidant, Merlin the Magician. Merlin acquiesces to the king's pleas, engineering by magic an opportunity for him to spend a night of passion with the beautiful Igraine, the wife of his sworn enemy, which will certainly endanger their uneasy détente. Arthur, then, strangely, is the product of a deceptive and rather evil union, as his father magically takes on the visage of Cornwall in order to lie with the beautiful countess. Meanwhile, her true husband is slain rather ignominiously in battle, as she is essentially raped by his bitter foe. Merlin obviously has some higher-level idea about what is supposed to be going on, some kind of political outcome he is striving for. But as Uther says,
"You don't understand, you're not a man."
He is not a man. He is some other kind of thing. So he must depend on men to wield the sword in order for action and progress to occur. But in this way, he is left at the mercy of men's petty whims, their desires and frailties. He, a wizard of immense power, can only do so much. That's the way I see the Arthur story in general, as this calamitous cause and effect, chain of events that ultimately spirals out of control. A story in which its characters more often than not are making the wrong choices, ensnared, no matter their station or reputation, into wrong-headed vendettas or lustful trysts. And the price comes due for Merlin's efforts. He demands the baby, the product of Igraine and Uther's unholy union.
Now you must pay me. The child is mine, Uther.
For what purpose, we do not know. Uther, interestingly, before so uninterested in Igraine's personal autonomy, her opinion, I guess, that he was willing to resort to deception to have sex with her, is now driven by her screams of sorrow, her pathetic pleas for her baby, so driven that he storms, unheeded, after Merlin. Unwise, we soon see, as he is sabotaged by men loyal to Cornwall. He is defeated by his ego, his hubris, and is slaughtered in revenge. A just payment for his treachery, perhaps. His final act, to drive the sword Excalibur into a mighty stone, sealing it there until the rightful heir may draw it. Throughout the film, there is this fairly unique lighting scheme when magic or elements of the spiritual world are making themselves known on Earth. And it's this glowing green light that appears at certain times. It's very distinct. And it gives the film a really distinct look. And I don't think it would be the same movie without it. It's sort of fairly unique, unmotivated lighting, but something I couldn't help but notice in another film of medieval adventure, the pre-Planet of the Apes Franklin J. Schaffner Charlton Heston collaboration, The Warlord, where these lighting cues are less motivated, more stylistic, but I couldn't help but wonder if Boorman had been inspired by this movie. We are soon introduced to young Arthur, arriving at this legendary spot with his adoptive father Sir Ector and brother Sir Kay. Here is where the young Arthur pulls the sword from the stone, an accidental moment of fate, as he does so out of necessity. Failing his older brother as a squire in his ability to keep safe his sword, he grabs the nearest weapon and seals his fate as king. Legend differs on whether or not Arthur can wield the sword merely because he is Uther's heir and the rightful king by patrilineage, or because he is simply worthy in a cosmic or religious sense. But Arthur is whisked away by Merlin to spend the night in the woods, meditating over the events of the day. It is here that Arthur encounters the raw wilderness and an array of forest-dwelling beasts. This is, I believe, a nod to my favorite Arthurian novel, T.H. White's The Once and Future King, a 4-volume series of books published in the late 1930s and early 40s. The first and most memorable volume of the book concerns Arthur's childhood and mentorship by Merlin, who transforms him into a variety of animals. Each episode, be it Arthur's transformation into a fish or a hawk, teaches the young boy a lesson about hierarchy, the way of the world, ultimately instilling in him kingly virtues and lessons on the most effective and moral ways to wield power. Though we don't have time to dwell on those whimsical tales in this film, this moment is an obvious nod and does work to reinforce the idea that Arthur has a special relationship to the forest creatures and the land in general, which will become important later. I actually think Nigel Terry does a really nice job as the young Arthur. At first, when you watch the film, you might long for maybe a younger child to be the one that pulls the sword from the stone, or you might think that Nigel, being a sort of, man in his late 20s, might have a hard time playing this young soul. But, when I was reading through Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the author here of the poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, describes Arthur. He was charming and cheerful, childlike and gay, and loving active life. Little did he favor lying down for long or lolling in a seat. So robust his young blood and his beating brain. I really love that passage describing Arthur as this ebullient, fun-loving, excited, and energetic king, which really gives a lot of credence to the idea that Camelot was an idea worth fighting for, led by a man with a lot of conviction and energy and focus and vision. And I think that Nigel Terry really portrays that well. Before long, Arthur's worth is proved as he rushes to put an end to a nascent civil war that has broken out in response to his apparent ascendancy. Arthur quells dissent by offering himself to be knighted by Sir Uriens, who has been violently contesting his claim to the throne.
You're right. I'm not yet a knight. You, Uriens, will knight me.
This is a great scene, one invented by Boorman and his co-author, screenwriter Rosbo Pallenberg, that displays Arthur's noblesse oblige in his willingness to prostrate himself to an inferior, but also his extreme confidence that he will inspire by his acquiescence loyalty from a more seasoned knight. Keith Buckley plays Uriens, and he does a wonderful job in this moment.
In the name of God, St. Michael, and St. George, I give you the right to bear arms and the power to meet justice. That duty I will solemnly obey.
Remember, these are a savage people. To be a knight may well have been a savage life, but Arthur, in his Christ-like offering, positioning himself as a lamb, is too much a sight for this man of war. He relents in seeing one who, by this pacifistic act, displays an almost foreign courage that upends the Hobbesian cycle of violence. The scene itself is almost reminiscent of Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist, heralding one who will do greater works than I, etc., etc. And indeed, a major element of the Arthurian legend is of Arthur as a progressive king. The Round Table itself is a deeply political signifier post-Magna Carta, the idea of equality in knights of the realm, and of Arthur, the greatest king of the Britons, valuing equality before the law, not just for his subjects, but for himself as well. An ideal that is used against him in the trials of Guinevere and Lancelot, and in many versions of the story, as ne'er-do-wells like Morgan Le Fay and Mordred seek to upend Camelot by holding Arthur to his lofty principles, in a world that is hostile towards or suspicious of such aims.
My laws must bind everyone, high and low, or they're not laws at all.
You are my husband.
I must be king first.
Arthur is married to Guinevere, in the film the lovely daughter of Sir Leodegrance, played by Patrick Stewart. She is obviously smitten with Arthur's bravery and tends to his wounds beneath a lush tree after the battle. During the festivities in which the newly unified kingdom is celebrating, Arthur confides in Merlin of his love for the sprightly young princess, in a scene that visually parallels the failed peace banquet attended by his father, and his father's yearning for Igraine. While similar doom will follow from both unions fail for different reasons. Merlin even says as such, outlining to Arthur exactly what will become of him and Guinevere. Yet Arthur pays no heed, and comically so. Arthur, now the official king, tames the realm. His loyal fighting force, the Knights of the Round Table, as if driven by divine right, bring all in the turbulent England under one banner, and many adventures assuredly were had. Lancelot soon makes his appearance as a knight who will not be moved until he meets his better. Arthur bests him in combat, but at the price of his majestic sword, which is hewn in the final besting stroke.
You have broken what could not be broken.
It is here Boorman has Arthur learn a lesson, not to lose his head to sacrifice his birthright and by extension the kingdom on petty challenges and vendettas. It's clear that the magic of the sword willed Arthur to win the day, and he is given a second chance. Still, he has won Lancelot's loyalty, and the Knight of the Lake comes to find permanent home in Camelot. We are introduced to Camelot, the shining city on a hill, if you will, through the eyes of young Percival, an up-and-comer who is willing to follow Lancelot across rugged terrain on foot for a chance to join in the new bounty of riches, nobility, and promise of Arthur's creation. Through Percival, the audience is treated to the glory and perhaps glamour of Camelot, its array of technological and industrial marvels that life and order there cultivates, as well as the fair maidens roaming its gilded halls. And I suppose we should talk about the production design of Camelot by longtime Boorman collaborator Anthony Pratt. It's this almost space-age, brutalist-inspired erection. You can see where they're going with this, even if they don't always pull it off, leaving some spaces looking like they were covered in tinfoil. Boorman has even signaled his own displeasure with how it turned out, but it does sort of complement the design of the armor. The armor is one of the most famous and biggest flashpoint talking points on the movie. It's this incredibly bulky, larger-than-life creation that make the film and its look stand outside of time, which is a key feature of the legend, in my opinion, and should serve as a defense against any critics who call the armor or the costume designs unrealistic or not historically accurate. No version of the Arthur tale is historically accurate. Malory's stories are a tribute to a lost time of chivalry and knightly virtue written all the way back in the 15th century. He crafted an ode to what he saw as a lost time, placing Arthur's exploits in the late 400s AD. Well, if that's the case, then the story is rife with glaring historical anachronisms. An example, jousting, a key feature of Malory's Arthur stories, did not exist as such, and were much more a product of the 11th century. And no one wore full plate armor in the 400s, no banners and frills would adorn a castle. We're talking much more about like a Beowulf time period of leather armor and spears. But Malory dresses his cast with the accoutrements of his time, and adorns their world with chivalric customs and ideas completely foreign to the time in which he purports to write about. Now, I'm not trying to criticize Malory here, not at all. He was able to give Arthur's stories a gloriously nebulous feeling. You can never pin them down to a specific time or place, so the imagination can roam free, and this idyllic, beautiful, aspirational idea of Camelot becomes fantasy in the highest sense, a mysterious, present tradition of a time forgotten, one that never actually existed, yet seems to be within our reach. The Arthur legend is often inscrutable because it presents itself in so many different ways, as a founding story of Western civilization, portrayed sometimes as equally important to or as existing hand-in-hand with the Christian tradition. Look only at Edward Burne-Jones's painting The Last Sleep of Arthur in Avalon. It's a mural whose composition and blocking seem to both prefigure widescreen Hollywood epics of the 50s and also give Arthur's death a religious gravitas, similar to Da Vinci's The Last Supper. Sometimes Arthur can be a timeless adventure tale in the aspirational, almost American sense. One of my favorite Arthurian artists is N.C. Wyeth, an American pulp illustrator and painter whose association with high adventure like Robin Hood, Treasure Island, or even burgeoning stories of the grand American epic like The Last of the Mohicans, I believe this helped place the Arthur stories in the canon of boys' adventure literature in the early 20th century. No doubt, this inspired one of my favorite works by Norman Rockwell, which is called Boy Reading Adventure Story, in which we see a bespectacled and eager youth absorbed so in the stories of chivalric knights that he imagines himself transported to that place and time, himself a gallant knight on his steed, shielding a beautiful maiden, and that to this young American boy the stories of Arthur are too his birthright. Boorman, I think, makes a great stride in Excalibur by presenting Camelot and its knights as almost futuristic, as if Camelot, long portrayed as the pinnacle of Renaissance ideals, as now in his film, the pinnacle of perhaps a futuristic society, or as portraying the pitfalls of one, the downfall of a seemingly futuristic society being something he explored in his earlier film, Zardos. See how the armor in Excalibur conspicuously stands against the natural world. It's artificial looking, a testament to the grandeur of the knights and their deeds and their status, but it's not exactly ergonomic. You can see the actors struggling against it. The armor was so loud and cumbersome on set that basically the entire movie had to be ADR'd in post-production, lending the dialogue and line delivery a sort of nebulous feeling that contributes to the film's dreamlike nature or gives it a sort of veneer of unreality. And just for the record, while it does do those things, I think the ADR is a detriment to the film's overall quality. Now, whether or not the artifice of the armor was intentional on Boorman's part is anyone's guess. Maybe he just thought it looked cool, but it does seem to put Arthur and his knights in conflict with the land. As we discussed before, Arthur's relationship to the land is critical. And as Camelot begins to degrade amidst accusations of hypocrisy and Arthur's rigid code of ethics, putting his wife and best friend in peril, the future of Camelot becomes uncertain. Merlin is sentenced to a millennia in the crystals after foolishly cultivating the evil Morgan Le Fay as his apprentice, and Arthur discovers the treachery of Lancelot and Guinevere and banishes them from the kingdom, leaving his sword as a calling card. Perhaps a misuse of Excalibur, to abandon it in such a vengeful way. Perhaps Arthur had not learned his lesson. Maybe to be a great king requires one to harden themselves against such things for the good of the order. But can we really ask that much of Arthur? I love these sort of penultimate scenes, too, that lead us out of the second act, cross-cutting between each other. They build and build as Merlin is ensnared and Arthur confronts his worst fears, culminating with the birth of Mordred, Arthur's bastard son, in the now wretched halls of Morgana's paternal castle, now bathed fully in eerie green light, where once she witnessed as a child Arthur's treachery against her mother, now she sows the undoing of his bloodline. In response to this revelation, the Knights of the Round Table march to prayer in a room illuminated with equally unnatural red and blue light, striking, all the same, no pun intended, as God himself delivers a bolt of lightning that pierces Arthur's armor, showing his disfavor in grand fashion. And Arthur succumbs to a lethargy, an unnatural process of premature aging as his project of Camelot begins to fail. The land and its people begin to waste away alongside their king. At the same moment, Mordred, now grown into adolescence, wreaks havoc across the land, goaded on by his mother and clad in gleaming golden armor, and a mask that seems to mock the ideal of an angelic boyhood and stands in contrast to his deeds. While it recalls H.J. Ford's conception of Mordred as this more androgynous and trickster-like character, it also reminded me very much of Anthony Pratt's similar mask design for the exterminators in Zardos, men who rape and pillage the land and its people, misled into foul deeds by the equally sinister floating stone head Zardos, both masks representing a false ideal imbued in them by a controlling force, which makes Mordred somewhat of a tragic character in himself.
I cannot give you the land. Only my love.
That's the only thing of yours I don't want.
Perhaps the court can get back into the graces of the Lord if they were to recover the Holy Grail, the cup that caught the blood from the pierced abdomen of Christ at the crucifixion. This mission, however, will prove doomed. The portrayal of the Grail Quest and its failure is one of my favorite sequences in the film, as we find Percival struggling in this dreamlike wasteland, hung up to die by Morgan Le Fay alongside a row of failed questing knights. This moment is excellent, as he struggles to remain conscious, the noose wringing the air from his lungs, the rope tight around his neck, yet the errant spur of another unfortunate knight picks at the strand of the hangman's rope, and he is ultimately liberated, falling to his knees, gasping for air, a vision of the Grail shown to him, however briefly. It's just great stuff.
Arthur, the secret was in my grasp. I failed you.
All seems lost, but Percival is granted access to the secrets of the Grail, at last. And what it symbolizes or comes to convey is not utopia on Earth, but a chance for Arthur to understand himself, his purpose, and the source of his power and legitimacy.
You and the land are one. Drink.
I'm wasting away.
Arthur, again, full of strength and purpose, marshals his courage, makes amends with his wife, finds vitality for one last ride to finally confront his son on the field of battle. When Arthur rides out, the trees spring back to life, and the knights ride through a beautiful whirlwind of white blossom petals. It's a wonderful moment shot at John Boorman's own English country estate, where he also shot scenes for Zardos. Both movies are concerned with ecology and what it takes to build a natural society that exists in communion with nature. Perhaps Camelot, like the vortex of the Eternals in Zardos, finds itself out of balance and due for destruction. So do I contradict myself, then, in my observation about the armor seeming to stand outside of nature? Perhaps, but I think this is a theme that Boorman tends to lean on, the uneasy relationship between man and nature, or the cyclical relationship, as in his film The Emerald Forest, in which an industrialist played by Powers Booth journeys into the Amazon to find his lost son, taken as a child and raised by a rainforest tribe. Here, too, Booth, with his rifle, looks out of place in nature. Ultimately, there is no true way in Boorman's conception of these things to live. The natural state and relationship to the forest is inherent in man, and so is his Faustian nature, the urge to build and cultivate and craft monuments to achievement and ideals. That Boorman is not conclusive about the best way for one to live is, I think, part of the power of these stories. So ultimately, Arthur's final ride and the resurgence of the natural world that accompanies it is more of a springtime surge of growth, and as with nature, is accompanied by the dying of winter, to perhaps be reborn again.
You brought me back. Your love brought me back. Back to where you are now. In the land of dreams.
Lancelot, reduced to a raving madman after his exile, returns when Arthur needs him most, rallied to the cause, and an immense bloody battle unfolds, marred, I'm afraid, by an overabundance of smoke and low lighting. But when it works, it really works, as we see Mordred confront Arthur on a field strewn with fallen knights against an incredible sunset backdrop, impaling himself and his son on the same spear as the heavy sun looms in the background, a sun setting on Camelot. Finally, it is Percival, the knight who shared our awe at this new city of Camelot, and who teetered on the edge of death before being tantalized by the Holy Grail, who fails Arthur's final task, to discard the sword. He fails, and Arthur chastises him until he does finally return the sword. Why did he do this? Perhaps he didn't believe. Perhaps he believed that the sword, like Camelot, was a physical thing, something that should not be cast aside on a hope. But it seems that Excalibur, like Camelot, and like the kingdom of God, let's say, are not of this earth, that they are a promise of something else, something intangible, like nostalgia, like the longing for another time, and how that longing can drive us forward into the future. These are things not to be wielded or erected from stone, but to be believed in and worked towards passionately. And so Arthur ultimately is spirited away to the mystical land of Avalon, sworn to return after his long rest, should Britain ever need him again. The story of King Arthur is sort of upsetting. It's about a man who tries mightily, despite his flaws, to bring order and justice to a disordered land. He is undermined in an almost fatalistic way, as if the entire project of Camelot was doomed, in the same vein in which the Tower of Babel was destroyed by God, humanity reaching for something that's out of its grasp. It's a fascinating story, in all its various tellings, that emerges as something tied to the Christian tradition and its promise of rebirth in Christ and forgiveness of sin, but one that is plagued in its margins by the remnants of paganism, epitomized by Merlin, a man of mysterious magic who knows the future and its inevitability in the same way the oracle foretold the fate of Oedipus. These two forces, I think, are in opposition. But maybe this is the enduring key to the story's power, along with the mythic salutation promising Arthur's return.
One day, a king will come, and the sword will rise again.
Though it seems far away, even Mallory's story was longing for a time which never existed, but which many want to believe did. Perhaps utopias are never meant to be achieved on this fallen earth, but the striving is the point. I'll leave you with a quote from Boorman on the intangibility of meaning in the film, which I think applies well not just to the movie, but to our collective cultural understanding of the Arthurian myth in general. Movies are always better when you present an audience with these combinations of images and sound. They act like metaphors, and I think the audience understands them without knowing why or how. I think that in films, well, in the good films anyway, they can talk directly to the audience's subconscious. Well, guys, thank you for joining me in the beautiful woods on this fine fall day as we discussed Excalibur. I really appreciate you, as always, tuning into the channel. Thanks for the likes and subscriptions, and I really appreciate, how much the show is growing, and I love interacting with all of you guys. If you'd like, I have a few videos that are members only that you can pay, $2 or $5, something like that, to help support the channel and keep this thing going. But until next time, I really appreciate seeing you.